Imagine a file dump so massive it feels unreal. Millions of pages, emails, photos, flight logs and reports. And inside it you don't just see one criminal. You see a whole ecosystem orbiting the same name, Jeffrey Epstein. People hear the Epstein files and their brain instantly fills in the worst version of reality, because this case doesn't feel like a normal crime story. It feels like a story about who gets protected, who gets ignored, and how information gets controlled. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, I'm not here to name drop for shock value, and I'm not here to turn tragedy into entertainment. I'm here to explain the story in a way that actually makes sense, even if you've never read a single headline before. And I'm going to be very careful about one thing, because it matters. A name appearing in a document is not the same thing as proof of a crime. And a rumor on social media is not evidence. So we're going to separate what is documented, what is alleged, and what is still unknown. First, what are the Epstein files in plain English? They are not one magical folder that contains the full truth in perfect order. They are a mixture of records connected to investigations and related cases, things like emails, contact lists, documents and reports released in large batches, often with redactions to protect victims and ongoing legal constraints. So a file dump can feel like everything, but in reality, it's usually a slice of the bigger machine, and it's often messy, incomplete, and easy to misunderstand if you don't know what you're looking at. To understand why these releases triggered so much chaos, you have to understand why trust collapsed first, and that starts with the timeline. The story begins in the mid-2000s in Palm Beach, Florida, when police received reports that Epstein, then known as a wealthy financier with elite connections, was exploiting underage girls at his home under the cover story of massages. That word, massage, becomes a recurring pattern in the allegations, because it wasn't a spa, it was a lure, and it created a cover that sounded normal enough for adults to look away, and confusing enough for teenagers to get trapped. By 2008, Epstein accepted a plea deal in Florida that became the first major trust fracture, because it resolved the case with limited state charges and a sentence that many critics described as shockingly lenient for the scale of what was being alleged. He served time, but he also had a work release arrangement that made it look to ordinary people like two different justice systems were operating at once, one for regular people and one for people with money, lawyers and friends in the right places. For years after that, the public story went quiet, not because the underlying reality was solved, but because the system had already processed it in a way that reduced it to something manageable. And that is exactly how big scandals survive. They don't disappear. They get administratively minimized. Then in late 2018, the case roared back into national attention after investigative reporting exposed the 2008 deal and elevated the voices of survivors who said they had been denied justice. That reporting didn't create the scandal, it revealed how the scandal had been contained. And once the public sees containment, it starts asking the question that never stops echoing after that. Who had the power to contain it, and why? In July 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein and charged him with sex trafficking and conspiracy, and now the case was no longer a past mistake, it was a present-tense emergency. The allegations described a pipeline of grooming and exploitation involving dozens of girls, some as young as 14, and it was presented not as a one-time crime, but as a system that ran for years. This is the moment where the story becomes psychologically radioactive, because people can handle the idea of a monster, but they struggle with the idea of a monster operating openly around powerful institutions for that long. Epstein was held in the Metropolitan Correctional Center while awaiting trial, and then, on August 10, 2019, he was found dead in his cell. The official conclusion was suicide. And if you only remember one thing about why conspiracies exploded, remember this: his death didn't just end a life. It ended the public process. No trial means no testimony, no cross-examination, no courtroom narrative where claims get tested under rules, and when you remove that process, you create an information vacuum that people will fill with stories. Years later, the US Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General documented a chain of negligence, misconduct, and job performance failures inside the jail that created the conditions for Epstein to take his own life. And official investigations said they found no evidence of foul play. But here's the thing. Even if you accept the official finding, it still feels unbelievable that a detainee this high profile could die in a facility designed to prevent exactly that. And the human brain hates unbelievable outcomes that have huge consequences. So the public did what the public always does when the stakes are high and the explanation feels unsatisfying. It searched for a story that feels proportional to the outrage. Now, after Epstein's death, attention shifted to the network around him, because predators like this rarely operate alone. The most important criminal case there is his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted in federal court in 2021 for her role in trafficking and grooming, and sentenced in 2022 to 20 years in prison. That conviction mattered because it confirmed in court that there was a structure around Epstein, a human infrastructure that helped him recruit, normalize, and sustain abuse over time. Then the civil cases exploded, and this is where the story moves from individual evil into institutional failure. Civil court is different from criminal court, because criminal court is about proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, while civil cases often fight over responsibility, negligence, and damages, and many cases end in settlements that don't include admissions of wrongdoing. Survivors and governments sued major institutions that had done business with Epstein, arguing that those institutions enabled him by providing financial services and legitimacy, even as red flags were raised internally. Two banks became central symbols in this part of the story, JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank, both of which reached major settlements connected to Epstein-related claims. Whether you believe those institutions were reckless, indifferent, or complicit, the takeaway for the public was simple and devastating. The system that moves money kept moving money. There were also major reputational and legal consequences for high-profile figures connected to Epstein's orbit, including Prince Andrew, who denied allegations and later reached a financial settlement in a civil case. And again, I'm saying this carefully, association and mention are not proof, and civil settlements are not criminal convictions, but in the public imagination, these events all blend into the same emotional conclusion. Powerful people live in a different reality. Now let's talk about the files, because this is where the modern explosion happened. For a while, the public narrative was, Epstein is dead, Maxwell is convicted, case closed, and that story is emotionally convenient because it lets people move on. But it never felt closed, because the unanswered questions didn't go away, they just went quiet. So survivors, journalists, and lawmakers pushed for more transparency, and that pressure led to a new phase. Large releases of records connected to the Epstein investigations and related legal fights. In early 2026, the US Department of Justice released a huge new batch described as more than 3 million documents, and lawmakers were later offered controlled access to review unredacted versions on government systems. Here is why that kind of release causes chaos, because when you dump a mountain of information all at once, almost nobody reads it, but everybody reacts to it. People skim, influencers clip, partisans cherry-pick, and the internet does what it always does. It turns complexity into a contest of narratives. And in that environment, one sentence becomes a weapon, one name becomes a headline, one screenshot becomes proof, even if it's missing context. This is also why I keep repeating the same warning. A name in a file can mean 100 different things. It can mean contact, meeting, rumor, allegation, legal strategy, or simply that someone was mentioned by someone else, and none of that automatically equals guilt. If you want to be unplayable in an information war, remember 3 rules. Rule 1, ask what the document actually is: an email, a claim, a report, a witness statement, a memo, because each one has a different weight. Rule 2, ask what it does not show, because absence of a name does not prove innocence. and presence of a name does not prove guilt. Rule 3. Follow the legal outcomes, because convictions and verified findings matter more than viral screenshots. Now we arrive at the cultural meme that took over the planet: Epstein didn't kill himself. That phrase spreads not only because people believe a specific murder theory, but because it functions like a cultural summary of a deeper feeling: I don't trust the official story because I've watched the system protect the powerful before. This is what I call the trust trap. Once people start from "they're hiding something," every new document becomes proof of a cover-up, whether it supports that or not, because the conclusion came first, and the evidence is now being used as decoration. So why did this case become the perfect storm for conspiracy culture? First, power and secrecy. Epstein had wealth, access, and high-status relationships, and that alone activates something in the human mind, because people intuitively understand that power can bend rules. Second, a visible failure of justice. The 2008 plea deal looked like privilege to many people, and when the public sees privilege in the justice system, it doesn't just create anger, it creates permanent suspicion. Third, an information vacuum. His death removed the trial, the testimonies, and the public record that a courtroom would have built. And when the public doesn't get a clear process, it will invent a story that feels emotionally fair. And fourth, the internet. The internet doesn't reward the most careful explanation. It rewards the most clickable one. And Epstein is clickability in its purest form. Rich predator, elite friends, private island, mystery death, sealed files, and names people recognize. Now, let's add one more ingredient that made this case uniquely explosive: the role of media gatekeeping. For years, there were journalists digging, but the story struggled to break through nationally in a way proportional to its significance. And then a moment went viral that conspiracy thinkers treat like a trophy: the leaked footage involving Amy Robach, complaining that an interview with an Epstein accuser had been shelved years earlier. Whether you think that was editorial caution, legal fear, lack of corroboration, or something darker, the public didn't hear nuance. The public heard. They had it, and they buried it. In a low-trust culture, buried it quickly becomes protected them, and protected them quickly becomes it's all controlled. This is why Epstein became bigger than Epstein. He became a symbol of the feeling that reality is curated for you, that you are shown what you are allowed to see, and that the real decisions happen off stage. Now here's the part that matters most, because I don't want to leave you with paranoia, I want to leave you with clarity. Even if there is no grand conspiracy behind every detail, the documented facts already show something terrifying. Systems can fail catastrophically when the defendant is rich, connected, and protected by complexity. And here is a more uncomfortable truth. Sometimes no conspiracy is not comforting, because no conspiracy can mean something worse. It can mean negligence, fragmentation, bureaucracy, and weak accountability. And that means the next Epstein is not prevented by defeating a villain, but by fixing a system. So what do we do with these files? We do two things at once. We demand transparency where possible, and we refuse to let the conversation be hijacked by the loudest rumor. We ask better questions, like who made the 2008 deal possible, what checks failed, what incentives rewarded silence, and what reforms would prevent similar cases from being minimized again. Now, after everything you've heard, here's my own theory. I don't think transparency always means truth, because sometimes what looks like openness can also function like noise. Sometimes institutions release a huge pile of material and the public feels like, finally, we got the truth. But the size of the dump is so overwhelming that almost nobody can process it, and that confusion becomes a kind of control. It reminds me of that childhood moment. Your little brother keeps begging to play, you ignore him, so he brings the one person you can't say no to, your mum. And you finally say, fine. Here, take the controller. But you give him the controller that isn't even connected. He thinks he's playing. He feels included. He feels satisfied. But you're the one still controlling the game. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what happened here. I'm saying this case teaches a bigger lesson about power. Sometimes power doesn't hide by deleting information. Sometimes it hides by flooding you with information. And when everyone is busy arguing over screenshots and names and theories, the deeper questions get buried again. The questions about how the system failed, who benefited, and what changes would actually prevent the next disaster. And that's why this story is not only about one man's evil, it's also about our attention. Because attention is currency, and when your attention is steered, your reality is steered. And there you have it. Power, conspiracy culture, and the collapse of trust, all tangled together. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it in the comments. Do you think massive file drops create transparency, or do they create noise? And what curiosity question do you want me to answer next?